Imagine you're about to get a tattoo.
Okay.
Maybe something really personal,
Mm,
a piece of art that'll be with you forever.
right.
You've carefully chosen an artist, someone who seems to share your values,
Yeah.
someone you feel like you can really trust.
I see.
But then that trust is shattered.
Oh.
The person wielding the needle,
Mm-hmm.
the one in a position of power, uses that power to exploit and harm.
Oh.
That's the reality that multiple people in the Seattle tattoo scene have come forward to share.
That's terrible.
And today we're going to deep dive into their stories.
Sounds like an important deep dive.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to be unpacking the allegations against Archie Bronson.
Right.
He's a prominent Seattle tattoo artist.
Got it.
We're going to be looking through the eyes of survivors like Shane Fitch and Tyler Porter,
Uh-huh.
as well as a fellow artist named Connolly.
Okay.
And it's not just about like one bad actor.
Right.
It's about understanding how the dynamics of the industry can create vulnerabilities and how the community grapples with accountability in the face of abuse.
Absolutely. So let's start with Tyler Porter's experience.
Okay.
He's a trans man who's been pretty open about his journey,
Yeah,
both personally and as a tattoo artist.
I see.
He actually had a really tough time at his first shop,
Oh,
dealing with a pretty toxic work environment.
that's awful.
So when he found Lion's Paw Tattoo, it was a total game changer for him.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it was really great for him.
So what was so special about Lion's Paw? What was so different?
Well, from what we can tell from Tyler's story,
Yeah.
it was this incredibly supportive space for him
Mm.
where he could be himself,
Right.
where his mental health actually improved.
Oh, wow.
And he found sobriety.
That's amazing.
It was like a family to him.
Really? Like a family?
Yeah, so you can understand why joining Bronson's new shop, Blood Orange Tattoo, felt like a natural next step for him.
Yeah, for sure.
Bronson had this really interesting online persona
Yeah.
that resonated with Tyler and seemed to share his progressive values.
Right.
And Bronson was clearly impressed by Tyler's talent.
So it sounds like a really good fit on paper.
It did, right?
Yeah.
Almost as soon as Tyler starts working at Blood Orange, these cracks begin to appear in Bronson's facade.
Oh, no. So what happened?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Okay.
So Tyler starts noticing these inconsistencies in Bronson's views,
Uh-huh.
describing him as someone who loved to argue just for the sake of it.
Oh, so kind of a contrarian.
Pretty much. And he even contradicted himself
Really?
on things like women's rights and bodily autonomy,
Oh, wow.
which is, pretty ironic considering his profession.
Yeah, that's pretty ironic.
Yeah, it's like a total bait and switch.
So Tyler must have been pretty surprised by this.
He was, and then there's this really unsettling thing
Oh.
that Tyler picks up on.
What's that?
Bronson seems fixated on tattooing a very specific clientele.
What kind of clientele?
Young, often vulnerable women who are sex workers.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what do we make of that? What does Tyler think about this observation?
Well, you connect it back to power dynamics.
Power dynamics? Okay.
He points out that sex workers face a lot of stigma
Mm-hmm.
and systemic barriers
Yeah,
when it comes to reporting abuse.
that makes sense.
They might be afraid of not being believed or even facing legal consequences,
Right.
which makes them easier targets
Unfortunately.
for someone looking to exploit their vulnerability.
I see. So it's not just an abstract observation then.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Tyler sees Bronson subscribing to these clients' OnlyFans accounts.
Really?
Yeah, and even if it's technically legal, it feels like a major breach of trust
Yeah.
and professional boundaries.
I can see why he would feel that way.
Right.
Totally.
It blurs the lines between the professional and the personal
Right.
in a way that can feel very predatory.
Yeah. That's definitely a red flag.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then when you add in Tyler's personal experiences with Bronson,
Mm-hmm.
it gets even more complicated.
Okay, I'm listening.
So Bronson starts pushing Tyler to try polyamory.
Polyamory.
Yeah, essentially being in multiple relationships at the same time
All right.
with everyone's knowledge and consent.
I see.
And look, polyamory can be perfectly healthy and ethical,
Of course.
but that's not what's happening here.
Okay, so what was going on?
Bronson made inappropriate comments about Tyler's existing relationship,
Well, what kind of comments?
even suggesting opening things up when Tyler mentioned that their sex life was struggling.
Wow, that's so out of line.
Yeah.
It sounds like he was using his position of power to kind of manipulate Tyler
Exactly.
to his advantage.
All about control
Yeah.
and pushing boundaries.
So it doesn't stop there, though, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It extends to the people around Tyler, too.
What do you mean?
There's this incident where Bronson touches Tyler's girlfriend, Danielle,
Oh, no.
inappropriately at a bar.
He just touched her without her consent.
Yeah, in public.
Oh, wow.
And it's important to note that Danielle chose not to confront Bronson directly at the time.
I see.
She was afraid of retaliation
Yeah.
and of not being believed
Right.
and potentially jeopardizing Tyler's job.
Yeah. That's a really difficult situation.
It is.
It's a really common dilemma for survivors,
Yeah.
weighing the risks of speaking up against the potential consequences.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
And this wasn't an isolated incident, right?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay, so tell me more about that.
There's another instance where Bronson touches Danielle again, this time at a dinner.
Seriously.
Yeah, it establishes a really clear pattern of disregard for boundaries.
It makes you wonder, how do we create these environments where people feel empowered to speak up?
It's a big question.
It is.
It's something we'll keep exploring as we go deeper into this.
Okay, I'm ready.
Now things escalate further.
Okay.
When Tyler and Bronson attend a tattoo convention together.
Oh, this is the one that Tyler calls the convention from hell, right? Didn't he have a really bad experience with long drives?
He did. Tyler has a phobia of long drives stemming from a traumatic childhood experience.
Oh.
He was upfront about this with Bronson, and Bronson initially refused to help with transportation.
So how did they even end up going to the convention together?
Bronson eventually agreed to bring Tyler's equipment back to Seattle after the convention.
Okay.
Tyler was very specific about what needed to be taken,
Right.
emphasizing how valuable and essential his tools are to his livelihood.
I see.
He even offered to load the car himself, but Bronson insisted on handling it.
I have a bad feeling about this.
When Tyler gets back to Seattle, he discovers that Bronson left all of his equipment behind at the convention.
Oh my gosh.
It's just blatant disregard for Tyler's livelihood,
Wow.
and it's the final straw.
I can't even imagine the frustration.
He was furious.
Yeah.
Tyler finally confronts Bronson about his behavior.
Rightfully so.
The lack of communication,
Yeah.
the disrespect for his tools, everything.
Good for him.
But even when he's caught red-handed,
Yeah.
Bronson tries to shift the blame,
What?
claiming he had arranged for someone else to take the equipment.
And of course, that turns out to be a lie.
Exactly. Tyler checks with the other person,
Uh-huh.
and they deny ever having agreed to take the equipment.
Classic.
Yeah, it just reinforces this idea that Bronson is a master manipulator, incapable of taking responsibility for his actions.
It really does.
And then to make matters worse, there's this whole issue with taxes.
Oh, right. Tell me about that.
Okay, so when they started working together,
Yeah.
Bronson had agreed to handle sales tax payments.
Which is pretty standard practice.
Yes, in most tattoo shops.
Okay.
But then Bronson suddenly backtracks,
What's...
claiming his CPA advised a different approach.
Which leaves Tyler on the hook for potentially a year's worth of unpaid taxes.
Yes!
That's awful.
It could mean penalties and late fees, a huge financial burden.
Ugh. Classic Bronson, putting his own interest ahead of his employees' well-being.
Classic Bronson.
So this is what ultimately leads Tyler to quit Blood Orange.
Yes, he cites the tax issue and Bronson's ongoing disrespect for his boundaries as the reasons for leaving.
I can see why.
It's a turning point in the story, marking the end of their professional relationship.
Right.
But as we'll see, it's just the beginning of a much larger reckoning.
Wow. Okay. I can't wait to hear more about that.
Yeah, we're going to get into all that.
All right. Awesome.
So Tyler's experience is sadly not an isolated incident.
Right.
Shane's story reveals another layer of Bronson's manipulative behavior.
Okay.
And it gets into some really complex relationship dynamics.
Right.
So Shane identifies as non-binary
Okay.
and was already in a polyamorous relationship with their partner
I see.
when they met Bronson.
Hold on. Can we back up for a second?
Great.
I think it's important for our listeners to understand what polyamory actually is,
Okay.
because it might not be something everyone's familiar with.
You're right. Polyamory, in a nutshell, is the practice of having multiple romantic relationships at the same time, but with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved.
Okay. So it's not just cheating.
No, it's about open communication, honesty, and respecting everyone's boundaries.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So Shane was already in a polyamorous relationship, and then they meet Bronson.
Right. And just like Tyler, Shane initially found Bronson charming and trustworthy.
Really?
Yeah, they connected online,
Huh?
and Bronson presented this image of himself that aligned with Shane's values.
I see.
He was even open to Shane joining his existing polyamorous relationship with his girlfriend.
So on the surface, it sounds like everything's pretty open and consensual.
Right.
But I'm guessing things weren't quite what they seemed.
You're right. There were red flags right from the start.
Oh,
Other artists in the community actually warned Shane about Bronson's behavior.
really?
Yeah, but Shane wanted to give Bronson the benefit of the doubt
Right.
and brushed it off.
Okay.
And then Bronson himself started pushing Shane's boundaries sexually,
Oh, wow.
even after Shane had clearly communicated their preferences.
So Bronson knew what Shane was and wasn't comfortable with.
Right.
And he still pushed those boundaries.
Yeah, it's a huge violation of consent.
Right.
And it speaks to a pattern of disregard for other people's limits.
It does.
And on top of that, Bronson pressured Shane to keep their relationship secret.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, which added another layer of control and isolation.
It sounds like he was intentionally trying to create this dynamic where Shane felt isolated and dependent on him.
It's a classic tactic used by abusers.
It is, yeah.
He didn't stop there.
No.
Bronson would constantly villainize his girlfriend to Shane, making her seem unstable or difficult.
So manipulative.
Yeah, which created this distance between Shane and Bronson's girlfriend.
That's so manipulative.
Yeah.
It's like he was intentionally trying to prevent Shane from forming a genuine connection with his girlfriend.
Right.
And getting a more objective view of the situation.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining control.
Wow.
Now, things took a devastating turn when Bronson sexually assaulted Shane after a night of drinking.
Oh, my God.
Shane described feeling frozen in the moment, unable to react.
That's a common trauma response, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's sometimes called fawning.
Right. It's like your body's fight or flight response gets overridden,
Mm-hmm.
and you go into this mode of trying to appease the attacker to avoid further harm.
Right.
Shane also said that Bronson used more force than they had previously discussed
Oh, wow.
and ignored their requests to ease up.
That's awful.
And then how did Bronson react after the assault?
Yeah. Did he take any responsibility?
Of course not. He downplayed the whole thing,
What?
claiming he couldn't remember everything that happened because he was drunk.
Come on.
He kept pushing for an in-person conversation,
Yeah.
likely to avoid leaving any digital trail.
That's so calculated.
It's chilling, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Shane thankfully saw through his manipulation and
Definitely.
refused to meet in person.
I'm glad.
They eventually decided to file a police report, but they ran into the same frustrating barriers that many survivors encounter when seeking justice.
What do you mean barriers?
Like the police didn't take their report seriously.
Seriously.
Yeah, it's unfortunately common. There's often a lack of understanding and resources when it comes to sexual assault cases,
Wow.
especially when it involves complex dynamics like polyamory.
Right.
Survivors might face disbelief,
Mm-hmm.
victim blaming,
It's awful.
and a general lack of support.
Yeah.
It's incredibly discouraging
It is.
and can deter people from coming forward.
So what did Shane do
Mm.
after the police didn't really help?
They reached out to Tyler, sharing their story and the realization that Bronson had a pattern of abusive behavior.
Okay, so it sounds like this was a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
Showing the power of community
Right.
and shared experiences in breaking the silence.
Absolutely.
It makes you realize how important it is for survivors to connect with one another,
Yeah.
to know that they're not alone and that their experiences are valid.
It's so important.
It is.
Now, Connolly's perspective adds a crucial layer to this story.
Okay, so who is Connolly?
They represent the voice of the Seattle tattoo community as a whole.
I see.
Initially, Connolly was friends with Bronson.
Okay.
They were drawn to his efforts to build a sense of community among artists.
So Connolly was kind of in Bronson's inner circle then.
Right.
What was their reaction when the allegations came out?
Connolly was shocked and disgusted. They immediately distanced themselves from Bronson and wanted nothing to do with him.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I imagine the reaction within the tattoo community was probably more mixed, right?
You're right. It was a mixed bag. Some artists and conventions, like the Seattle Tattoo Expo, took a firm stance and banned Bronson,
Oh,
which is a big deal in the industry.
that's huge.
And others continued to support him.
Really?
Yeah, either minimizing the allegations or outright discrediting the victims.
That's so frustrating.
Mhm.
Why would people still support him after all of this came to light?
It's complicated.
Yeah.
In any industry, especially one like tattooing where it's built on personal relationships and reputation,
Yeah,
there's this pressure to protect your own.
I see.
Some people might be genuinely skeptical,
Right.
while others might be afraid of speaking out and jeopardizing their own careers.
Yeah, I can see how that fear of retaliation would be a huge factor,
It is.
especially in a tight-knit community like that.
Absolutely.
But to Connolly, staying silent wasn't an option, right?
Right. Connolly felt strongly that turning a blind eye to abuse is not neutrality. It's siding with the abuser.
No, horrible.
They called out people who claimed to be neutral,
Mm-hmm.
while still following Bronson on social media, liking his posts, and even boosting his Google rating.
Wow.
It's a form of complicity that allows abusers to continue operating with impunity.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
It's about recognizing that silence can be just as harmful as actively supporting the abuser.
Absolutely.
Okay, now remember how Bronson tried to control the narrative by staying silent initially? Well, that backfired spectacularly.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
He finally addressed the allegations.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Okay. But his statement read more like a carefully crafted PR move than a genuine apology.
Oh, really?
He talked about working on his behavior and seeking therapy, but it all felt very superficial and lacked any real acknowledgement of the specific harm he caused.
Not a very convincing apology, then.
No, not at all.
What happened next?
Well, he made things 1,000 times worse.
Oh.
In a desperate attempt to discredit Shane, he doxed them online.
Doxed them? What does that mean?
It means he publicly revealed their full name.
Really?
And shared private messages without consent.
Oh, wow.
Talk about digging your own grave.
So how did the community react to this?
The backlash was swift and fierce.
That makes sense.
People saw right through Bronson's lies
Mm-hmm.
and attempts to manipulate the situation.
Right.
Tyler actually talked about receiving hundreds of messages from other survivors sharing their own experiences with Bronson. Hundreds. So this wasn't just a couple of isolated incidents.
Nope. It sounds like there was a whole pattern of predatory behavior.
Oh, wow.
And the stories were all eerily similar. Unsolicited nude pictures, coercive sexual advances, even allegations of drugging,
Oh, God.
and threats to share compromising photos.
Seriously.
It was a horrifying glimpse into Bronson's true character.
So this is where his carefully crafted persona totally crumbles.
It does.
Did he try to use his background as an excuse for his actions?
He did. It was pathetic and offensive.
What do you mean?
He tried to play the cultural differences card,
Oh, no.
saying that his Russian heritage made him misunderstand social cues.
Wow.
He also claimed to have autism,
Really?
which he later admitted was a lie,
Oh, my God.
and tried to use that as a way to explain away his predatory behavior.
He faked having autism.
Yeah.
That's despicable.
It is. I mean, it's one thing to try to explain your behavior,
Yeah.
but to exploit a real neurological condition to deflect blame is just beyond the pale.
It really is.
Both Tyler and Shane called him out on it.
Good.
They pointed out that cultural differences and neurodiversity are not excuses for abuse.
Exactly.
Bronson's actions were a clear violation of basic human decency and respect,
Right.
and his attempts to excuse them were completely unacceptable.
So what happened to Bronson after all of this came out?
Yeah, did he face any real consequences?
Well, the fallout was significant. He
Right.
lost sponsors, got banned from major conventions,
Right.
and became a pariah in the Seattle tattoo scene.
Wow.
His reputation was completely tarnished.
It sounds like it.
But both Shane and Tyler wanted to see him held legally accountable.
Yeah,
They wanted him to face criminal charges for his actions.
I can see why.
But I imagine it's a long and difficult road to get justice in cases like this, right?
It is.
Sexual assault cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute.
Yep.
And there's often a lack of funding and resources for survivors.
Exactly.
Plus, there's the fear of retaliation that prevents many people from coming forward in the first place.
Right. It's a complex issue with no easy solutions.
It is.
So where does Connolly fit into all of this? I mean, what was their take on what needed to happen next?
Connolly called for a community-wide effort to push Bronson out of the industry entirely.
So they wanted to ensure that he could never harm anyone else again.
Exactly.
Okay.
They also stressed the importance of recognizing and challenging the subtle ways in which abusers are protected and enabled,
Right.
pointing fingers at those who stayed silent or tried to minimize the harm Bronson had caused.
It's a powerful reminder that true accountability requires collective action.
It does.
It's not enough to just call out the abuser.
Right.
We need to create a culture where survivors feel safe and supported to speak their truth, and where there are real consequences for those who abuse their power.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to stop for.
Okay.
We can pick up the conversation next time.
Sounds good. So last time we were talking about Tyler's experience with Bronson.
Right, his experience at Blood Orange Tattoo, and how things took a turn for the worse.
They did, so let's dive back into that.
Okay, sounds good.
Now, where were we?
Well, we left off with Tyler quitting Blood Orange Tattoo.
Oh, right.
And his decision to leave
Yes.
was prompted by a number of really unsettling incidents.
It was.
Including Bronson's inappropriate behavior towards Tyler's girlfriend, Danielle.
Right, that's right.
And that whole thing with the unpaid taxes.
Oh, yeah, that was just awful.
It really was.
And the thing is, Tyler's experience, as awful as it was, it's not an isolated incident.
It's not, no.
There are actually a lot of similarities
Okay.
with Shane's story.
Really?
Yeah, Shane's story kind of reveals another layer of Bronson's manipulative behavior.
Okay, so tell me about Shane's story.
Yeah, okay.
What happened with them?
So Shane actually identifies as non-binary
Okay.
and was already in a polyamorous relationship with their partner when they met Bronson.
Okay, so polyamory, just to clarify,
Yeah.
is the practice of having multiple romantic relationships at the same time,
Exactly.
but with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved.
Right, right.
It's all about being open and honest with each other.
It is, and respecting everyone's boundaries.
Exactly.
So Shane was already in this kind of relationship,
Right.
and then they meet Bronson.
Yeah.
And just like Tyler, Shane initially found Bronson to be really charming and trustworthy.
Really?
That's hard to believe, right?
It is after everything we've heard.
I know.
Okay, so they met Bronson and...
They connected online.
Uh-huh.
And Bronson kind of presented this image of himself
Yeah,
that aligned with Shane's values.
I see.
He was even open to Shane joining his existing polyamorous relationship.
So that sounds pretty open and above board.
It does, but as you can probably guess, things weren't quite what they seemed.
So what happened? What were the red flags?
So right from the start, there were these red flags.
Okay.
I mean, other artists in the community had actually warned Shane about Bronson's behavior.
Really? So people knew about this guy?
Apparently so, yeah.
And what did Shane do?
Well, wanting to give Bronson the benefit of the doubt,
Right.
they brushed it off.
Okay.
But then Bronson himself started pushing Shane's boundaries sexually,
Oh, wow.
even after Shane had clearly communicated their preferences.
So he knew what Shane was and wasn't comfortable with.
He did.
And he still pushed those boundaries.
He did, yeah, which is a huge violation of consent.
Yeah, it is.
And it just speaks to a pattern of disregard for other people's limits.
It really does.
And on top of that, Bronson pressured Shane to keep their relationship a secret.
That's not good.
No, it's not.
It kind of adds another layer of control and isolation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It's almost like he was isolating Shane from other people.
Exactly. And he
Okay.
didn't stop there.
So what else did he do?
He would constantly villainize his girlfriend to Shane.
He would.
Yeah.
What do you mean, like bad-mouthing her?
Yeah, exactly. Making her seem like she was unstable or difficult. And this created this distance between them.
Between Shane and his girlfriend?
Right.
That's incredibly manipulative.
It is, right.
He's intentionally preventing Shane from forming a genuine connection with this woman.
Exactly. He's trying to control the narrative.
Right, and prevent Shane from getting a more objective view of the situation.
Exactly.
And what happened next?
Well, things took a really dark turn one night when Bronson sexually assaulted Shane
Oh, no.
after a night of drinking.
This is terrible.
It is, and Shane described feeling totally frozen in that moment.
Frozen.
Yeah, just unable to react.
Wow, that's a common trauma response, isn't it?
It is.
It's sometimes called fawning.
Yes, it is.
The body's fight or flight response gets totally overridden,
Yeah.
and you go into this mode of trying to appease the attacker to avoid further harm.
Exactly.
And what about Bronson? How did he react?
Because he didn't take any responsibility.
He didn't.
No, he just downplayed the whole thing, saying that he couldn't remember everything that happened because he was drunk.
Oh, come on. That's such a cop-out.
It is. But he kept pushing for an in-person conversation.
I see. So he could control the narrative.
Right, and probably avoid leaving any kind of digital trail.
That's so calculated.
It is, but thankfully Shane saw through his manipulation
Okay, good.
and refused to meet in person.
I'm glad to hear that.
Shane eventually decided to file a police report,
Okay.
but ran into the same frustrating barriers that a lot of survivors encounter when they're seeking justice.
So the police didn't really take their report seriously.
Not really, no, which is sadly very common.
That's terrible.
It is.
There's often just this lack of understanding and resources when it comes to sexual assault cases,
There is.
especially when they involve complex dynamics like polyamory.
Right.
Survivors might face disbelief,
Yeah,
victim blaming,
they do.
and just a general lack of support.
Absolutely.
So it's incredibly discouraging.
It is.
And it can really prevent people from coming forward.
Yeah.
What did Shane do after the police didn't help?
Well, they reached out to Tyler and shared their story with him.
Okay.
And they both realized that Bronson had this pattern of abusive behavior.
That's really powerful.
It is.
It shows the power of community and shared experiences
Mm-hmm.
in breaking the silence around abuse.
Yeah, exactly.
So it really highlights how important it is for survivors to connect with each other
Right.
so they can know that they're not alone
They're not.
and that their experiences are valid.
They are.
Now, Connolly's perspective adds a crucial layer to this story.
Okay, tell me about Connolly.
So Connolly actually represents the voice of the Seattle tattoo community as a whole.
I see. Okay.
Initially, they were actually friends with Bronson.
They were?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
They were drawn to his efforts to build a sense of community among artists.
So Connolly was kind of in Bronson's inner circle then.
Yeah, you could say that.
What was their reaction when the allegations came out?
Well, they were shocked and disgusted. They immediately distanced themselves from Bronson and wanted nothing to do with him.
That makes sense.
It does, but I imagine the reaction within the larger tattoo community was probably a little bit more mixed.
It was a mixed
Oh, it was a mixed bag.
Okay.
Some artists and conventions took a firm stance and banned Bronson.
Good.
Like the Seattle Tattoo Expo actually banned him.
Wow.
Which is a huge deal
It is.
in the industry.
Yeah.
But others continued to support him.
Really? After everything that came out,
Yeah, it's complicated.
why would anyone still support him at that point?
I think it speaks to the dynamics of the industry,
Yeah.
especially one like tattooing,
Right.
where everything is built on personal relationships,
Mhm.
reputation.
Yeah.
There's this pressure to kind of protect your own.
I see.
So some people might be genuinely skeptical,
Right.
while others might be afraid of speaking out
Yeah.
and potentially jeopardizing their own careers.
Right. That makes sense.
And that fear of retaliation can be a huge factor,
It can.
especially in such a tight-knit community.
Exactly.
But for Connolly, staying silent wasn't an option.
It wasn't.
No, they felt very strongly
Yeah.
that turning a blind eye to abuse is not neutrality, it's siding with the abuser.
That's a good point.
They called out people who claimed to be neutral
Okay.
while still following Bronson on social media,
Right.
liking his posts, and even boosting his Google rating,
Oh, wow.
which allows abusers to continue operating with impunity.
That's a really powerful message.
It is. It's about recognizing that silence can be just as harmful
Yeah.
as actively supporting the abuser.
It really can be.
And remember how Bronson was trying to control the narrative
I
by staying silent?
Right.
Well, that completely backfired.
He did.
He eventually released a statement.
He did.
Yeah, but it read more like a carefully crafted PR move than a genuine apology.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he talked about working on his behavior
Okay.
and seeking therapy, but it just felt very superficial and lacked any real acknowledgement of the specific harm that he had caused.
Not very convincing then.
No, not at all.
So what happened next?
Well, he made things even worse.
Oh, no. How?
In a desperate attempt to discredit Shane,
Right.
he actually doxed them online.
Doxed them. What do you mean by that?
He publicly revealed their full name.
Seriously?
Yeah, and he also shared private messages without their consent.
Wow, that's a whole other level of messed up.
It really is.
Did those messages even support his claims?
Ironically, they did the exact opposite.
Oh, wow.
The messages that Bronson shared actually confirmed his manipulative behavior.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And contradicted his earlier claims of not remembering the events.
He basically shot himself in the foot.
He really did.
So how did the community react to all of this?
Well, the backlash was immediate and intense.
Got it.
People saw right through his lies
Right.
and his attempts to manipulate the situation.
So it really backfired on him.
It did.
In a big way.
It
So Tyler talked about receiving hundreds of messages from other survivors.
hundreds of messages.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sharing their own experiences with Bronson.
So this wasn't just a couple of isolated incidents then.
No.
It sounds like this was a pattern of predatory behavior.
It was. Spanning years, probably.
Yeah, and the stories are eerily similar.
What do you mean?
Unsolicited nude pictures,
Okay.
coercive sexual advances,
Why?
even allegations of drugging and threats to share compromising photos.
Seriously?
Yeah, it was just a horrifying glimpse into Bronson's true character.
So this is where his carefully crafted persona totally crumbles.
It does, yeah.
Did he try to use his background as an excuse for his actions?
Yeah.
He did. What do you mean?
He tried to play the cultural differences card,
The cultural differences card.
saying his Russian heritage made him misunderstand social cues.
Oh, wow.
He also claimed to have autism,
Really?
which he later admitted was a lie.
Oh, come on. That's awful.
I know.
It's one thing to try and explain your behavior. Right.
But to exploit a real neurological condition to deflect blame,
It's just wrong.
it's beyond the pale.
It is.
So what did Tyler and Shane say about that?
Well, they both called him out on it,
Okay, good.
pointing out that cultural differences and neurodiversity are not excuses for abuse.
Exactly.
Bronson's actions were a clear violation of basic human decency and respect,
Right.
and his attempts to excuse them were just completely unacceptable.
So what happened to Bronson after all of this came out?
Well, the fallout was pretty significant.
Okay.
He lost sponsors,
Huh.
got banned from major conventions,
Wow.
became a pariah in the Seattle tattoo scene.
His reputation was completely tarnished.
It was.
But it sounds like both Shane and Tyler wanted to see him held legally accountable.
They did.
They wanted him to face criminal charges for his actions.
Yeah,
But I imagine that's a long road.
it is.
And a difficult one
Yeah.
to actually get justice in cases like this.
Especially sexual assault cases, which are notoriously difficult to prosecute.
Exactly. And there's often this lack of funding and resources for survivors.
Right.
Plus, there's the fear of retaliation, which prevents a lot of people from coming forward in the first place.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with no easy solutions.
It really is.
So where does Connolly fit into all of this?
Well, Connolly called for a community-wide effort to push Bronson out of the tattoo industry completely,
Go.
to ensure that he could never harm anyone else again.
Right.
They stressed the importance of recognizing and challenging the ways that abusers are protected and enabled,
I see.
and they really pointed the finger at those who stayed silent or tried to minimize the harm that Bronson had caused.
It's a really powerful reminder that true accountability requires more than just calling out the abuser. It does. It requires a collective action.
Yes.
To create a culture where survivors feel safe and supported to speak their truth,
Right.
and where there are real consequences for those who abuse their power.
Absolutely.
So last time we were talking about Connolly's perspective.
Right, and how they called for a community-wide effort to basically push Bronson out of the industry.
They did, and it really makes you think,
It does.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
These stories force us to confront the reality that abuse of power can happen anywhere,
Right.
even in spaces that we think of as safe.
Absolutely. Even in spaces that we perceive as inclusive.
Exactly. And
Ah.
it's so easy to get caught up
It is.
in the image, the brand,
The persona.
the carefully curated online persona.
Exactly. And we forget that what happens behind closed doors can be completely different.
Yeah, for sure.
That's why it's so important to listen to survivors.
Right.
To believe their stories and to support them in their pursuit of justice.
It takes a lot of courage for survivors to speak out,
It does.
knowing the risks
Yeah.
and potential backlash they might face.
Absolutely.
And it's really their courage that brings these issues to light,
It is.
that forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths.
Right. And it reminds us that we all have a role to play in creating safer communities for everyone.
Absolutely. So we need to challenge those
We do.
who minimize or excuse abusive behavior,
Right.
hold perpetrators accountable,
Yeah.
and support organizations that advocate for survivors' rights.
I think that's key.
It is. It's about shifting the culture,
It is.
moving away from that silence
Yeah.
and complicity towards a place where transparency, respect, and accountability become the norm.
It's a big task.
It is. But we've covered a lot of difficult ground today.
We have.
And this deep dive has been a lot to process.
Yeah,
And it raises a lot of questions.
for sure.
How do we move beyond calling out abusers
Right.
and actually prevent these situations from happening in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
I think it starts with challenging power imbalances,
Yeah.
promoting consent culture,
Mm-hmm.
and creating clear pathways for reporting abuse
Right.
without fear of retaliation.
I think you're right. It's really about education, open dialogue, and systemic change.
I agree.
And it's important to remember that these issues extend
They do.
far beyond the tattoo industry.
Yeah.
Abuse of power can happen in any field, any community, any relationship
Absolutely.
where there's an imbalance of authority or influence.
It really can.
It really can.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
yeah.
I want to leave you with this.
Okay.
What can our listeners do in their own spheres of influence
Right.
to create safer, more equitable spaces?
That's a great question.
It starts with awareness,
Okay.
educating yourself about these issues,
Right.
recognizing the signs of abuse,
Mhm.
and understanding the dynamics of power and control.
Okay. And what can we do when we see something that just feels wrong?
Don't be afraid to speak up.
Okay.
Challenge those who make excuses for abusive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Support survivors.
Yeah.
and amplify their voices.
I think that's really important.
It is.
And if we're in a position of power ourselves,
Yeah,
I think it's about using that power responsibly,
absolutely.
ethically.
Modeling respectful behavior,
Right.
creating clear boundaries,
Yeah.
and ensuring that everyone around you feels safe and respected.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's so important.
And even though we covered a lot of really difficult ground today,
Yeah,
I think it's important to end on a note of hope.
I agree.
I think we can create change.
We
We
can.
can build communities where everyone feels safe,
Absolutely.
respected,
Yeah,
and empowered to thrive.
I think so too.
And it starts with each of us
It does.
taking responsibility,
Yeah,
speaking up,
Mm.
and demanding better.
absolutely.
Thanks for listening.